This is CinePunked. This episode, Fight Club. David Fincher's 1999 film Fight Club, based on the novel by Chuck Palahniuk, was met with a mixed reaction on its original release. Its top-notch cast, including Brad Pitt, Edward Norton, Helena Bonham Carter and Meat Loaf, didn't coax cinemagoers in as producers had hoped, and its mix of meta and trauma and super cool self-awareness left some baffled. But over the subsequent years, the film found a loyal following on home entertainment formats, a medium which allowed fans to replay the film at leisure, exploring the rich trail of breadcrumbs Fincher left to explain the narrative. Blasting onto screens just months after the Columbine massacre and a mere 2 years before the atrocities of 9/11, Fight Club is a stylish, if uncomfortable watch. It's a testosterone-filled exploration of terror, trauma and toxicity. It's 100% cinematic indulgence. The rules of Fight Club are legendary, so today we're going to do the done thing and break the first two and talk about Fight Club.
I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
And this is how I met Tyler Durden.
Hit me in the ear!
Wait, back up. Let me start earlier.
No, you can't die for insomnia.
What about narcolepsy? I nod off, I wake up in strange places.
Soap. I make and I sell soap.
Tyler Durden.
Hit me in the ear!
Well, Jesus, I'm sorry.
Oh, that was perfect.
Hello?
I haven't seen you at any support groups.
Found a new one.
Really?
It's for men only. We were finding out more and more that we were not alone. It was on the tip of everyone's tongue. Tyler and I just gave it a name.
Gentlemen, welcome to Fight Club. The first rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club. The second rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club.
You are not your job. You're not how much money you have in the bank. You're not the car you drive. You're not the contents of your wallet. We've all been raised on television to believe that one day we'd all be millionaires and movie gods and rock stars. But we won't. We're very, very pissed off.
Is that your blood? Some of it, yeah. Tyler, what is going on here?
I think you know.
In Tyler we trusted.
Hi, I'm your host, Robert J. E. Simpson, and with me tonight is my esteemed colleague, Dr. Rachael Kelly.
Hello.
All right, so it's been a while since we've done one of these together, just you and me.
Yeah, it's like the gang's back together.
All these infiltrators come in and they think, oh, we're going to take over. It's like, no, Rachael is part of the furniture, you know?
Yes, this is like original recipe, CinePunked.
That's it. So, Fight Club, for anyone who is sitting and watching or listening to this, just to put this into context, today as we record this is the 23rd of January 2022, and part of the reason we're doing this one is because one of the stars of the film, Meat Loaf, has just passed in the last few days, but it's also fair to say that there is a context for this within some of the stuff that we've been doing already. Now, we had actually just talked about Fight Club in a piece Rachael posted on our website last week about the top 10 films with actors turned rock stars, or rock stars turned actors.
Stars turned actors, or well, musicians turned actors. Yes, literally less than a week before he passed.
Yeah, I mean, we're quite fond of Meat Loaf anyway. This is our third Meat Loaf conversation we've had inadvertently, because we've also done Pick a Destiny.
Yeah, Rocky Horror. Yeah, so yeah.
In fact, we've done Rocky Horror twice, didn't we?
Good films.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite fond of him as a performer, and I think the thing that occurred to me in reading all this, and actually after you'd posted that, and I didn't have the heart to tell you, was that we've labelled him as a musician turned actor, but he's an actor turned musician turned actor.
Yes, fair enough.
Which I completely had forgotten that he started off wanting to do theatre, and the rock god kind of musical stuff was something else, just a way of him doing it.
Well, I mean, fair point, but what's he best known for originally is as rock god Meatloaf, Bat Out of Hell. So yeah, I'm trying furiously to think if that's the case of any of the other ones there, so I can just go, aha.
But he says it himself as like, I mean, for him, the whole rock persona was a persona. It was a character that he played. He treated his music no differently from he did his acting. He acted the role, which is sort of interesting. And it means that, I mean, I actually don't know Meatloaf's music particularly well. I think I've heard Bat Out of Hell once in my life.
Robert.
I know him as an actor. Weirdly, that's how I know him, is from his screen appearances. It is not from his music, apart from I Will Do Anything for Love, which I just remember being played endlessly as a kid.
I was going to say, I'm a little bit older than you, but I'm not that much older than you. Surely I Would Do Anything for Love was like the soundtrack of a particular portion of your youth as well.
Well, like maybe a summer, but it's 1 year. You know, it's like one thing, one song, one track. I mean, Rocky Horror.
That was kind of, that was my introduction to Meatloaf, was that song. And it's so gloriously operatic and over the top, and the music video is nuts in the best possible way. And my parents had Bat Out of Hell and Bat Out of Hell 2 when I was a kid, but it wasn't one of the ones that was always listened to. We were more kind of Bonnie Tyler, Dire Straits in the car on holidays kind of people, which, great stuff. My musical education was top notch, believe me. But once I kind of went looking for I went, oh, this is brilliant. I didn't know rock could be like this. And it kind of was, formative experience for a young, innocent teenage girl at that point.
It's such a strange thing that this is how we've ended up getting into this conversation. I mean, because obviously there was that. And then the other reason that we're doing this film at the time that we're doing it is that at the moment we're dealing with, we've got one of those rare things happening for regular listeners of the podcast, is that there's a thematic thread being woven right now in terms of altered realities and sort of that weird space in between the awakening conscience and the subconscious and what's real and what's not real, which, I mean, that's I've always thought that's the entirety of fiction film is all about that, really, because it's all an illusion. And
Plato's cave,
So, this fits very nicely within that. So that's why we're doing this film now. It's not just a shameless Meatloaf tie-in. We have actually got structural reasons to do it. We've editorialized.
Yes, well, you've editorialized. Don't accuse me of being in any way organized.
No, well, I mean, I was going to say to you before we started this one, I very nearly decided to stay awake all last night in order to do this podcast to see if I could get myself into that state of mind, because my sleep's up the left anyway. I had 3 hours sleep the night before, but then I got really, really tired and fell asleep last night and had a big snooze, so I am more awake than I would have been otherwise. You
really should have mentioned, because I have 2 young kids, so I rarely sleep.
So we could have actually
voluntarily insomniac.
What do you remember about this on its release?
Ooh, I didn't see this on its release.
Okay.
I remember there being a huge, big sort of hype around it. And I was in university at the time studying media studies, because film studies was not then available. But media studies as an avenue into studying film. And I remember there being a big, huge hype about it at the time. And I remember reading about it in the film magazines, because this was really pre-internet being massive. And, whenever I was sort of thinking about doing this and reading up around it, and I went, 1999, gosh, that's not that long ago. I went, yeah, no, it is. It really is a long time ago. That is now 23 years ago. And the internet didn't really exist in the same way back then. So I remember the big hype about it, but I never saw it until a couple of years later. I think it must have been, it would have been sort of early to mid 2001. When I saw it wouldn't even have been DVD at that point. It would have been VHS. Oh my God, I'm so old. But it had just been spoiled. It had literally just been spoiled for me. And this is the other thing. I mean, people talk about the internet as well as this sort of big anarchic sort of ruleless place, but people are so into flagging up spoilers on the internet. Back in the day when it was print media, nobody cared. Like, oh, this film's 2 years old. Now that would be enough for huge spoiler warnings on the internet still. But 2 years, cry me a river. It's ages. You should have seen it by now, and they spoiled it for me.
Well, we should probably pre-spoiler warn anybody else from this point on.
Yes, because we care. We're conscientious.
So just in case, I'm having to do this now on our podcast, but just in case you haven't seen Fight Club at this point, in the next 30 seconds there'll probably be a spoiler, so go and watch the film and then come back, or if you don't mind having any element of it ruined for you, watch it and then come back to us.
We can spoiler now then, I assume.
Oh yeah, no, we can talk quite liberally. I don't know why I've just told people to go away twice rather than actually what I should have done, which was say, like, if you haven't seen, you don't mind being spoiled, then you can carry on listening, but I've told them to go away, watch it and then come back.
Press pause, go and watch the film, it's worth watching, and then come back and listen to us be erudite about it. Or you can do what I did and go into it spoilered and still actually get a lot out of it, because I can spoiler now, yeah? So I knew that Tyler Durden was one and the same person. He was like a separate part of the narrator's identity.
So the Brad Pitt and Ed Norton characters are the same.
Are the one and the same, yeah. I knew that going in, but I didn't believe it.
We're the same person.
That's right.
We are the all singing, all dancing crap. Tyler, I don't understand this.
Because I was watching it going, that can't be right. There's no way that's right, because it doesn't make sense. And then at the end is, okay, yeah. But also, no, because at one point Brad Pitt's driving a car.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it sort of feels a bit like, I think that probably worked better in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the film you have to take you have to find a way to represent something physically on the screen. You have to take a yes, this is what definitely happened approach to it, because you are physically representing it. Whereas in a book, I could see, I haven't read the book, but I could absolutely see that would work, because we are not seeing an actual physical representation of what's going on there. We are in the perspective of an unreliable narrator. So it's mediated through the narrator's perspective anyways.
What's the difference between something like that though and those sequences where we see him fighting? Because it's, Ed Norton is frequently in the background of those shots. He's not the one that's there. They are very clearly two distinct people in that space.
Well, for me, that is not quite the same thing, because there's a physicality to that, but it works just as well if it is Edward Norton in there doing the fighting and kind of watching himself, almost like that projection of the character outside of himself, watching it happen. Driving a car, you physically got to have your hands on the wheel. He's sitting in the other seat. Or not in the case of that. But, I could kind of see how the conceit works around that. And it doesn't not work for me, don't get me wrong. I don't understand how he manages to shoot himself in the cheek and not actually tear half his face off and die. But, maybe
it's probably whatever caliber of pistol he's using at the time. In terms of the car, logistically, I guess I've suffered some of the same things, and knowing the outcome, watching it this time, I was much more conscious of the fact that they are the same person and trying to work out how they are perceived by other people around them. Yes.
Made a lot more sense to me. The discussions with Marla made perfect sense, because all of a sudden you understand. She is just completely confused about what's and her confusion makes sense, and her aggression towards the narrator makes sense, because he's being an absolute tool as far as she can tell. And but I also, which I didn't get the first time round, and I wasn't sure if I'd got it because I didn't remember seeing it, but the little sort of single frame insertions of Brad Pitt in the movie before he appears, and I was I'm certain I just saw Brad Pitt and I went, yeah, I probably did see Brad Pitt, because it's exactly the kind of thing that this movie would be doing to me, particularly a movie it's talking about Brad Pitt himself inserting images of penises into children's movies. So it's definitely the sort of thing. So I probably did see that, and it turns out I was right. I did see that.
You did. I mean, they're quite. The sort of the flash frame's an interesting kind of concept, because it's an element that takes you out of the world of the film for a brief second. It's the punctum. It's the thing that suddenly draws your attention. It completely distracts from whatever else, because you're watching these sequences and then suddenly there is this object that fleetingly just appears. It's worse than a fly in the gate or a hair in the gate, because that tends to stay, whereas this is like, and it's away. But it's in these spaces that are empty spaces where he suddenly appears. So you do kind of consciously do it. I mean, it's wonderful. I was freeze framing them last night, going back through it and just sort of like looking, and they're so well put together, like you really wouldn't notice there's a jar. But yes, it's also quite evident, as you say, about, you know, he's a character that sticks penises in the middle of kids' movies just for entertainment and shits and giggles. And this is something that apparently has been done for generations, subliminal imagery. The only other sort of previous example that I regularly remember seeing was in the BBC TV series The Young Ones. They used to stick flash frames in.
Oh, did they? I didn't know that. It was years since I've seen The Young Ones.
They put flash frames in, and sometimes they put like slightly more than one single frame, but there was these like brief little things that just threw you for a second, and it disorientates it stops you from completely accepting what you see, which is kind of the point, that you should be questioning everything that you're watching at all times. But there is, I suppose there's something else there as well in terms of what that character's doing, and I find myself kind of pondering a lot about who he is, about what he's actually about, and about who our narrator is, and you know, about what they represent. I read a piece earlier today that suggested that Tyler, as in the Brad Pitt Tyler, not actual Tyler, which is the Edward Norton character, that Tyler is the manifestation of somebody who was alive that had been killed in one of the car accidents that Edward Norton's character is investigating, and he's a representation of guilt and trauma, which I thought was interesting.
I find that interesting. I don't know that I find it convincing, because I don't know that I find it he's so detached from that. He's angry rather than traumatized, but the anger is at the world that is just not the world that he was promised. It's a world that's lacking in so many ways, and it's an ennui rather than a guilt for me.
He certainly seems to be, for me, he definitely feels like a representation of, I mean, it's a mental health crisis is what Norton's character's going through. Just nobody seems to, I mean, even the doctor's like, you know, I need something, I can't sleep, I haven't slept, just you need rest. Just like, yes, but I need something to help me get the damn rest, damn you.
No, go and see other people, because they have it much worse than you, so shut up moaning. Which is kind of, there's a lot to be said for how that is exactly the amount of mental health care that is provided in a lot of cases. Yeah, you're fine, stop complaining. What have you got to be depressed about?
Somebody else has it worse. I mean, it's a weird thing, and it's what's that in itself a response to, because you see that he needs the emotional outlet of the cry in order to give him the peace to let him sleep, and when he's suddenly deprived of that ability, that release, it builds up to the point where we have this massive crisis, and detachment. I mean, it is fascinating, and sort of going through some of the clues and the visual clips and stuff, where you sort of see like there are breadcrumbs everywhere that help you get an insight into what's going on in his head. But it's uncomfortable too, and I'm not 100% certain where it sits in terms of how it feels about mental health.
Yeah, no, I think this is a really 90s film. I think, close of the 90s, certainly. The 90s is all about that what the ennui, the promises unfulfilled. I am Generation X, you young millennial thing, you. I was born in the closing years of the qualifications for Generation X, so I am proudly a member of this generation, not one of those millennials with your avocado toast. But but so I remember kind of being part of this sort of generational angst, and I'm not, there's such a I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form that this does not also apply to millennials and Generation Y and Generation Z as well, because absolutely, this is a sort of an historical moment. But yeah, being part of that, and being part of that angst, and being part of that questioning, and being part of that, the reframing of authority, or part of sort of an apotheosis, I suppose, of that reframing of authority as being completely non-benign and not having best interests of anybody at heart, and the challenging, and child of the X-Files, for goodness sake. So it's about that. This is, we were told to expect more from life by our baby boomer parents, but actually the party's over. And I remember reading, must be about this, around about that time, that Generation X is the first generation in quite some time to be financially worse off than their parents on the whole, to have not succeeded economically and societally in the same way that their parents did. So there is a lot of that anger bound up in films, and it's just starting to find its expression in the 1990s, and it is pre 9/11 as well. So there's a different, it's kind of, I think it's really hard to overstate just how much of a different world that is. And
well, there's a few things in that, so I don't want to kind of like, I don't want to stop you from going through it, because it's good stuff, but we need to unpick it a little bit for anyone who's trying to follow along. So one of the first things is about the authorities being not necessarily as benign as we would have them believe, and this is released literally a couple of months after The Matrix, which we talked about in our last show, and it strikes me that is also doing something quite similar in terms of saying that the grand overlords are not necessarily happy people, that there is manipulation of fact in order to justify their existence, and that there is something there. Edward, it feels very much, sorry to interrupt you, but it feels very much as long as almost like a reassurance, the generation that, yes, it's not just you, and also it's not your fault. There's something non-benign sitting over you that's actually kind of crushing you. Well, it's interesting you mentioned fault, considering Ed Norton's job is as an insurance kind of appraiser, that he's exploring who's at fault. This is it. This is why I'm not in any way completely on board with what Fight Club is trying to do, I think, because it's almost as though it just wants to completely shrug off any sense of personal responsibility for this. He is a tool of this consumerist capitalist culture, and yes, he's upset by it, and yes, it's kind of ripping the soul out of him, but he's a tool of it. And he's a tool.
By saying, but it's not my fault, it's the society, and the society is dehumanizing, it's emasculating, and I'm forced to respond in this way because I have no other options, which the film is interrogating, and it's kind of exploding as well, literally exploding. But I don't know, I think you can't have it both ways.
His position is kind of odd. He does say at one point to the I think he says to Tyler, I was close to being complete. Whenever the flat explodes, it's like, everything, it's like almost like, well, I've got the house, I've got the living accommodation, I've got all my IKEA furniture, and yes, it is IKEA furniture specifically. I
love that he's ordering it on the phone, by the way.
You try and order something from IKEA on the phone, it's impossible.
I had it all, even the glass dishes with tiny bubbles and imperfections, proof that they were crafted by the honest, simple, hard-working indigenous peoples of wherever. I was holding. Your call is important. We used to read pornography. Now it was the Rachael collection.
Yeah.
And then he's told,
1999. He doesn't have the internet.
of course. And then he's told in response to things you own end up owning you.
Yeah.
And yet you feel like the thing that's missing from his little life is the partner, which Marla ends up being.
Yeah.
And yet one of the fascinating bits about the point where his life suddenly shifts is that he goes from this like pristine perfection where he is very, very well. I mean, he looks after himself, he looks after his space, he cares. And this is where I think the mental health breakdown is very apparent, is that suddenly he is living in squalor. He is in the dingiest of horriblest flats, fucking someone apparently who isn't very clean. There's a comment about that, which is possibly very judgmental, but at the same time, it's also probably, I get the impression that they're not that clean. And I mean, that just grosses me out for other reasons. But he's living, and it's, you know, there's a basement that's covered in about 2 feet of water. The walls are peeling. It is decrepit. It's a shithole. But that sort of reminds me of the way that sometimes when you're in a crisis with a mental health issue, that suddenly all that becomes too much and you let it go to shit. And you see it then manifest in him because he stops looking after himself. He goes into work. He's increasingly bloodied and scarred and damaged. And there is something wrong. And the relationship he then has with his boss is bizarre.
Yeah.
Because any other boss would have stopped him before now, would have sacked him if he's not doing his job, if he's constantly late. It's like there's some sort of, I don't know if it's compassion. But then this is also what I thought maybe just about fed into this other idea that there's something about somebody that the company had inadvertently killed, that he had overlooked, that he was witness to, that's the manifestation of the guilt, is that in some way the boss is aware of this and this is some reason why he's not been pulled over the coals about it. I don't know. I mean, it's a film. It's open to interpretation. Thankfully, films are. But it is a weird situation that ends up leading to this horrific fight.
Are you threatening me?
No.
Get the fuck out of here. You're
I
fired.
have a better solution. You keep me on the payroll as an outside consultant. And in exchange for my salary, my job will be never to tell people these things that I know. I don't even have to come into the office. I can do this job from home.
Who the fuck do you think you are, you crazy little shit? Security?
I am Jack's smirking revenge. What the hell are you doing?
Because it's not, the film's not wrong, and Tyler Durden's not wrong in that the things you own end up owning you. And that is what we as a generation have been, you know, that's kind of the received wisdom, is that success is measured in what you own and how big it is and how expensive it is. And that then becomes it sort of self-feeding, because you know you then are tied into this kind of hamster wheel of I must continue to be successful, so therefore I must continue to be in the biggest house with the best things, and there's absolutely nothing innate about that. It's just become so intrinsic to the way we understand ourselves in the developed world that it's become kind of an article of faith. And I don't know, I mean, this film was sort of hailed as kind of late stage capitalism deconstruction. We are still in late stage capitalism. It seems to be getting later and later and later. And at some point we are going to have to fundamentally unpack that relationship that we have with stuff, because it's completely unsustainable for all kinds of reasons. Not least, that the planet can't sustain it, but also the fact that it's a completely abusive relationship with stuff, because the more we are owned by stuff, the more susceptible and more vulnerable we are to being owned by whoever's in charge of making sure that we have access to stuff.
It's commented on the line. It says it's only after we've lost everything that we're free to do anything.
Yeah.
So there is this awareness that are tying down to material, and I realize that as a collector, those are words I don't want to hear, and they sit really awkwardly with me. It's like
I don't want to lose any of my books.
But then it's also a social thing, because I mean, like, not to use our discussions necessarily as a therapy, but I always think a personal element sort of helps in our understanding of the film, because we find stuff that we engage with and we respond to it. But I know for me, in terms of class, like coming from a working class background where we didn't have much, to have stuff actually felt like you had progressed in some way, and that's a hard mindset to shift.
Yeah.
And I get the impression that that is also in there amongst some of these characters, that or at least for him, not for the people involved in Project Mayhem, who seem to abandon everything bar the $300 for your funeral.
Yeah, I mean, again, but this whole this is another reason why it doesn't completely ring true for me, because the interrogation is coming from a place of serious privilege as well, because not everybody's going to be okay if they jack it all in, like explode their apartment and go and live and and then blackmail their boss into financing their sort of domestic terrorism. Not most people are not going to be okay. And I think that I read a couple of things where it kind of saying, this is really, it's centered around white heterosexual male privilege, effectively, because it's okay because the insurance company is going to pick up the tab for his exploded apartment until it turns out that he did it himself. But ultimately, what is the fallout for the narrator? In the book, apparently he ends up incarcerated in a secure psychiatric facility, which is entirely appropriate because the man has suffered a complete psychotic break.
Yes.
Which has led to him causing millions and millions of pounds worth of destruction. And the fact that nobody was killed, I mean, come on. I think
somebody was killed. There's bound to have been some...
There's no way. I mean, when the World Trade Center came down, people died just by being on the street. You can't explode 7 skyscrapers and say, no, nobody died because we made sure the buildings were empty.
And it's insurance companies and stuff anyway, so like it doesn't actually matter. Yeah. It's banks and insurers who are insured, so there's no real risk. But I mean, in it, I mean, that in itself is kind of curious, because this film would not have been made, or at least it wouldn't have ended as it does 2 years later.
Yeah.
You just couldn't have done it. I mean, when Spider-Man can't fly between the Twin Towers anymore because of the risks, there's no way you could have had those sorts of explosions.
No.
No. And for it to come inside, it's an act of domestic terrorism, ultimately, which, I mean, for the conspiracy mongers among you, is always one of the things that people do say about 9/11 is that it was an act of domestic terrorism covered up and exploited. I'm not subscribing to that belief, but you read and think what you're going to think. But I didn't see this on its first release. I think I picked it up on DVD, borrowed off a friend several years later. And I remember being shocked when I saw that ending. Like, just couldn't believe that they'd done a film when they allowed all those towers to collapse.
Did you see it post 9/11? See, I saw it pre. When I say 2001, I know it was pre 9/11 because I know where I was living at the time, and that was pre 9/11.
Well, it was definitely after 9/11 I saw, and I was shocked that something so recent was able to do that. And the taboo nature at that point, because there was a lot of films in Hollywood that were being changed in terms of what they were going to do because of the impact of that. And it is uncomfortable. And it's uncomfortable when you think about it. I mean, we're so far away from it now that I think most people watch this and not bat an eyelid. But it resonates. And then, I mean, like I said this in the introduction, is that proximity to Columbine and to 9/11 just makes you kind of rethink what was going on at that time, not just in terms of the film, but in terms of the psyche of people.
Yeah, there's like a paradigm shift going on, it feels like, or it's kind of a pre-paradigm shift. There's like a critical mass building up almost, but then it just it gets not erased but refocused a couple of years later. I mean, you not to bring it back to the Toga movie at all, which I would never do. Is you didn't think I could bring Fight Club.
I mean, I wondered how we were going to do this, but go ahead.
And here's how. Because Gladiator is from 2000. And it represents a reconnection with the Toga movies that were last kind of seen, Dead in the Water in the 1960s. And it represents a continuation of that quite optimistic theme that ceased to be culturally relevant in the mid 1960s because it was sort of new Hollywood emerging. But Gladiator represents a direct continuity link with that. 9/11 happens, and all of a sudden the movies that are getting made are 300 and Troy, and they're all about, we didn't want the war, they brought the war to us, and the locus of the Toga movie shifts so that it goes further east and it becomes being attacked by the East. And there is a paradigm shift, and I think if you it wasn't noticeable when we were living through it, but I think if you haven't actually sort of lived through it, it can be really difficult to come to grips with just how different the world was before that event, and how different what you could show and what you could interrogate filmically was. Not what you could, because it sounds as though there was some kind of overt prohibition on it, when it certainly wasn't. But I remember Cloverfield, it had to be done, the first kind of inkling of dealing with the trauma of the planes hitting the World Trade Center had to be done allegorically before they could ever address it directly. Cloverfield's very, very on the nose, but it's a great film, and if you read it as an allegory, it's just, well, yeah, how can you not read it as an allegory, for goodness sake? I mean, it's almost literally on the screen. But Scott, there you go. And that's how I related Fight Club to Toga movies.
I mean, one of these weeks we'll find a film that Rachael can't bring Toga movies into.
No, never going to happen.
I mean, on that, I mean, it's one of those interesting films in that it's one of the few examples I think we have where a film definitely seems to have influenced some real life activities, where there were instances of students going off and planting bombs and stuff, actual fight clubs being set up.
Yeah.
Whereas one of the things, and we've yet to ever really have a proper discussion about this in the show. It's about the day we do Clockwork Orange is the day we'll actually discuss this properly.
You will make me do Kubrick at some point, won't you?
Yeah, but I mean, it's a debate that keeps on coming up about how films influence behavior. And again, when you look at the timing of this and you think post 9/11, this would not happen because of the perception, and that it influenced people already. It's just like big warning signs are written all over it.
I mean, influence, I think, is a really strong word. But
it was used as an excuse to justify behavior.
And I mean, it's going to sound like a ridiculous hill to die on here, because there's fight clubs emerging in response to a movie about fight clubs. But I think one of the things that the film is trying to interrogate is the reason why they emerge that after the film, because it is looking to kind of isolate that alienation and that sense of being lost that is kind of it's consuming a generation at that point. So when the film goes, no, this is how you get around it, and I mean, for the record, I think that the films, it's packaged it very, very neatly and very stylishly and very cinematically, and I think it's kind of bullshit. But then I wasn't the target audience for that film. No. As a female Generation Xer, I can't imagine why punching people in the face was supposed to help. But apparently that resonated, and so influence suggests that there's some kind of causal link, whereas I think it's a bit more tenuous. I think it's more like the will to find some way to reconnect with that sense of lostness pre-existed the film, and the film just went, this is a way of doing it, and they went, oh, okay, let's give it a go.
See, so I debated whether or not to talk about this element of my personal life within this discussion, because this film is it's not as triggering, but it reminds me of some stuff that happened with me. And I mean, I went through a really rotten mental health crisis of my own at one point, and pain and alienation and lostness was all very, very caught up in it. And I was on antidepressants at the time, and it's the reason I won't go on antidepressants again was because of the way that it detached me from myself. I've talked about this. I may have talked to you about this before. I'm on other things talking about it, so this is not new news to anyone who's out there listening. But it put me in a situation that was quite like him in terms of I had almost out of body experiences where I started self-harming, and I was doing that, and it was literally like I was watching somebody else beat me, and I wasn't getting hurt, and I was looking for that pain to understand the stuff that was going on in my head, and feeling more and more frustrated because I didn't have people to connect with. And in a way, there was a physicality. I mean, it's a touch of something that was missing. I mean, this is me trying to make sense of what was one of the bleakest periods in my life. But there was points where I literally was beating myself, not quite like he beats himself up, but there was enough similarity for me to go, this actually is something that can happen, that this is a real life crisis, that this is uncomfortable, and that it's not that I imagine there are people who watch this and go, this is bullshit, unbelievable. Whereas I sit there and I go, this is scarily believable, and that frightens me that people can get to that point because his crisis is so bad and he has no control over it.
Well, he doesn't even realize he's in crisis.
Well, I think he does though, because he's asking the doctor for help he says he needs something.
No, you can't die for insomnia.
What about narcolepsy? I nod off, I wake up in strange places. I have no idea how I got there.
You need to lighten up.
Can you please just give me something? Red and blue 2-in-alls, lipstick red Sacanals.
No. You need healthy, natural sleep. Choose some valerian root and get more exercise.
Hey, come on. I'm in pain.
He's caught up with that. He is looking for help. He knows that he needs sleep and he needs an outlet and he needs to feel, because it is killing him. I mean, he addresses that early on.
But the only way that he's able to actually access that help is by adopting a series of personas. He's not able to access that help on his own terms. I mean, he becomes Cornelius. He becomes all of the different names of the men that go to the self-help meetings. He can't go and access help and say, I am in a quandary. I am in a crisis. I don't understand what's happening to me as himself. He has to go and adopt a form of pain that feels legitimate to him. He has to go and sort of almost put on a cloak of, cancer survivor or somebody living with terminal illness in order to be allowed to cry.
Seemingly the one self-help group that's advertised he doesn't go to is the schizophrenic group, which is probably the one group he should be in.
Yeah. Well, no, that's not fair, because he's got dissociative identity disorder, not necessarily schizophrenia.
Fair enough.
The two are often conflated, but not the same thing.
Fair enough. I stand corrected. He's an actor.
What? I mean, the narrator?
Yeah, well, I mean, if we take it logically, he is an actor putting on a show for all these people. He's putting on a show. I mean, whenever he is beating himself up, that is a show. When he does it in front of his boss, that is a performance. And he's performing for the person who's on the other end of the phone and who walks into that room while his boss is sitting there as a bizarre audience member, silently dumbstruck, not actually intervening at all, which I guess if somebody's tossing themselves against glass objects is what
how do you intervene in that without actually making it look worse?
Yeah, I really don't know. But I mean, so there is a point, and obviously he's like the showman. He's controlling everything through this other identity. He is putting on these personas. He goes through the motions of pretending he's no balls, which is, I mean, very, very, very clumsy metaphor in some respects. That he's at the testicular cancer group.
The whole testicular cancer group is a very, very clumsy metaphor. I mean, it's literally for a film that's talking about emasculation. I mean, there's a man in that group who literally has has been emasculated to the extent that he has no testicles and he's grown breasts.
I was a juicer. You know, using steroids, diagonal and withdrawal. Oh, they use that on racehorses, for Christ's sakes. And now I'm bankrupt. I'm divorced. And my 2 grown kids won't even return my phone calls.
And is quite tender, but also provides him with the moment that he needs, where he leaves this sort of like Turin shroud like stain of his head on Meat's bosom.
Go ahead, Cornelius. You can cry.
And then something happened.
So I mean, what does that say though? That, you know, for a film that's ostensibly about critiquing the feminization of culture to the extent that masculinity has become lost in itself, that the only place that he is able to actually connect cathartically with the alienation is in a group that has been not symbolically emasculated, but actually physically emasculated. So what does that say? And I want to throw, what about Marla? What's the film trying to say about Marla?
Well, it doesn't have an awful lot to say about women, let's be honest.
No.
There are very few in it. There's the woman who leads the cancer group, who sort of is a, you know, doesn't say an awful lot and sort of does the sort of the therapy thing with the room and the penguin, the cave, which I actually think is quite good. But, you know, as an act, I think that's a nice method to deal with your stuff.
And it works for the narrator as well. Again, you know, that feminine space works for the narrator.
And there's Chloe, who's the cancer victim who's desperate for a last shag. Which, you know, failing Bechdel test massively at this point. And then you've got Marla, who is weird. As she says, you know, she's every right to be in the man's group because she has no balls for the testicular cancer. She's positioning herself as somebody who is not entirely female.
You're a faker. You're not dying.
Sorry.
In the Tibetan philosophy, Sylvia Plath sense of the word, I know we're all dying, right? But you're not dying the way Chloe back there's dying.
So
you're a tourist. Okay, I've seen you. I saw you at melanoma, saw you at tuberculosis, I saw you at testicular cancer.
I saw you practicing this.
Practicing what?
Telling me off. Is it going as well as you hoped? Rupert.
I'll expose you.
Go ahead. I'll expose you.
Well, it's really, I mean, she walks on with all the iconography of the femme fatale. And she inserts herself into the masculine space as a femme fatale does. And she is kind of sexually, I want to say rapacious, that's the wrong word, but she's freely sexually available. As per the femme fatale. He's quite scathing. He calls her a tourist.
Yeah.
And
well, he denies her right to have any sort of emotional connection with any of those things, whilst he is also a tourist.
Exactly. But equally, the film's making a judgment call about her right to be there as well, because she's not even attempting. He's attempting to blend in and look as though he has the right to be there. Look as though he's not different from the people that he's in the group with. But a woman going to support group for survivors of testicular cancer is very much throwing it in their face. You know, I don't belong here. I'm just here for the free coffee. And she sits and smokes in a cancer group meeting, and she smokes. What's the one? Is there an emphysema one or something? There's a congestive lung disease group or something.
It's TB or something. I can't remember.
But yeah, so the film is positioning her as in some way not having the right to be there, whereas the narrator, although he realizes that he's being transgressive, because there is this emotional need that he has to find a way to fulfill, because it's otherwise it is kind of killing him. It's okay for him to kind of piggyback on other people's pain.
I mean, with her, she seems like, I mean, she's comes across, or she's presented like an interloper, that she's no right to be there. But I kind of wonder if her positioning is also to question the validity of those of exclusively male spaces and the possible toxicity within them. Because I mean, I think about some of those men's groups that have existed over the last couple of decades who like to go on. What's that fathers group that are always kind of putting protests and stuff on, setting Batman up buildings and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, those groups are not necessarily looked upon. Fathers for Justice, is that it?
Fathers for Justice, yeah.
I mean, I don't have a particular opinion on those groups, but there are certainly commentary that suggests that these are not necessarily healthy spaces, even though ostensibly they are meant to be healthy spaces. I mean,
Fight Club's not a healthy space.
No, it's not. But is that the problem? Because it's an exclusively male space, is that part of the problem? Because whenever he starts off his process, I don't know, there's also something quite tender about the relationship between him and Bob. I mean, Bob sort of exists as this sort of he's almost a trans character. He's no balls. He's got breasts. He's
certainly
the
liminal character.
Yeah, he's the most womanly of the men that we see within the film. He's comforting. He embraces. He's presented us with a high pitched voice. I mean, his masculinity is definitely subdued, but there's a warmth and a tenderness, and he's the one character that the Ed Norton's character actually seems to engage with and care about.
Yeah.
When he's killed, there is real emotion.
Yeah.
It's like, and it's not, I mean, it's a very Monty Python Life of Brian moment where they're like, you know, he had his name was wrong, and they're all like, then they start chanting the name. I mean, it's like, you know, okay, lead me Messiah. It's
like the death of Robert Paulson is kind of the wake up point for the narrator to actually begin to get to grips with the psychotic break that he's experiencing.
I mean, and that is a moment of trauma. I mean, so trauma is key to the alertness. I'm just not quite sure what puts him into the space to begin with. I've sort of sidetracked a little bit from the point about about Marla's purpose, because I'm not entirely sure. I don't know what it is that we're really meant to think about her.
But she ends up being almost redemptive, which the femme fatale never is.
Yeah, and I think he cares about her. I mean, I think by the end of it, he realizes he does care.
Yeah, well, certainly, and as the narrator, he always did, I think, even though she is manipulative. And she's manipulative as, I mean, you know,
she's toxic as well as the rest of them. I mean,
but ultimately, he harms her, I think, more than her toxicity harms him. Like considerably more.
You fuck me, then snub me. You love me, you hate me. You show me a sensitive side, then you turn into a total asshole. Is that a pretty accurate description of our relationship, Tyler?
She says, you're the worst thing that ever happened to me. And that's not wrong. Had he not vanquished the Tyler side of his personality before she was dragged up to the top of that skyscraper, she was going to die.
Yeah.
Because of him.
It's not I mean, I don't feel in any way positive about the actions and behavior of any of the men in this film.
Yeah.
At all. I mean, there's just nothing good about them. There's nothing redemptive. I mean, there's nothing redemptive about it, because ultimately he stands there and watches everything collapse around him. The only redemption is he hasn't killed her.
Yep.
It's like, well done. You're a fucking man who's been really toxic to another woman and managed not to kill her today.
Yeah.
I mean,
and that's kind of the qualifier, isn't it? He didn't kill her today.
Yeah. We're going to have to, I know we're going to have to wrap this up pretty shortly. So there's a couple of things I want to very quickly kind of like touch on. The first one we've sort of briefly commented on already with the flash frames. What does this film say about film? I mean, it feels like a very meta experience, particularly because, as I said, he's a showman. There's that point where they break the fourth wall about halfway through, and they actually show us how a film's constructed, and they make us very aware about the flash frames, and they make us very aware about the impact that they have potentially in small children, and also the cigarette burns and the real changes. And there's a break in the fourth wall. He literally talks to us.
Yeah.
Is that saying something? Is that just being clever for the sake of being clever, do you think?
That's a really, really good question. And if I were being ungenerous, which I would never be, I do. I mean, this is a very constructed film. It's a very stylish film. It's a very, very David Fincher in the 1990s film. It's one of the reasons I could never properly connect with Seven, his previous film to Fight Club, was because it was invested so heavily in reminding you that you were watching a film. And a lot of the sort of cinematic artifice was, and I find that really irritating. I like a stylishly shot film, and I actually think, I mean, for all that the film is, the style of the film is degraded and grubby and nasty, it's beautiful in that respect. I mean, it is, in every frame is a picture. It's just a really nasty, grubby picture that you want to wash your hands afterwards, but it's beautifully constructed. But I mean, is it any? I mean, I know this has been called retro noir rather than neo noir, and I'm not sure I completely agree with that either. But the whole kind of artifice, the whole sort of reminding you the fatalistic, this is how we ended up here kind of structure of the storytelling. It's very classic film noir, which, apart from the breaking of the fourth wall, which I don't know, I mean, that just feels like that kind of, aren't we so very clever and media articulate?
I mean, I suppose for me, it's the point at which, certainly on a second viewing, where you kind of go, you realize at that point what he's doing is he's letting you know that everything that you've seen has been a lie, and that you should have been paying attention and hear the clues. So second time around, you watch it and you see exactly those things, and you understand a little bit sooner. But it's like, I kind of feel that when you watch it the first time, and I mean, if you forget about the stuff you've been told, you sort of just watch through and you forget that actually he's making it clear. He's also, I think, being self-aware in that moment about himself and his own behavior.
Because the whole thing is perception.
Well,
and the whole the reality is perception. Reality is artifice. Reality is mediated.
Well, that's the thing I want to kind of like close up on with this conversation about this is about the reality and the sleep, the importance of sleep.
Yes. The importance of what?
I mean, so I feel that we can't talk about Fight Club without talking about that, what that has done, what that actually means about film and what that is. I think that's a very filmic thing to be concerned about that need to be alert and aware. There's something in my head about REM sleep and about retention of memory. I mean, that's part of it as well. I mean, film is 24 frames a second traditionally. So it's the constant flickering of images that in itself is quite hypnotic, that entrances, that sucks us in. So nothing we see is ever actually moving. Nothing we see is ever quite real. But I've also fallen asleep in films and woken up very disorientated, wondering what the hell has just gone on. And I think I may have seen Fight Club at some point like that as well. Just sort of
that would be disorienting, yes.
Yeah, just not quite sure. Even a film that you love, you're sort of like drifting in and out of consciousness. I mean, it's a strange thing. And I mean, obviously, anyone who's had children or looked after children for any period of time is very aware that sleep is something that is a luxury.
Yes.
Lose an hour, gain an hour.
Check-in for that flight doesn't begin for another 2 hours, sir.
This is your life, and it's ending 1 minute at a time. You wake up at Air Harbor International. If you wake up at a different time, in a different place, could you wake up as a different person?
Do you find yourself questioning your reality?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, yes, you get into that kind of fugue state where you're looking around and you almost hold your hand up in front of your face. You're like, what is this? What's going on here? Going in, and the sort of the fuzzy detachment and the sort of sense of standing outside of your body, which I suppose, yes, would have something in common with, if you wanted to stretch that analogy, would have something in common with the experience of watching film, standing outside of something, watching reality, and that's the whole point of film, is to disrupt the sense of watching, and it's to disrupt the knowledge of watching, and to disrupt the memory of watching.
So that strikes me that is exactly what he is then. Our narrator is essentially somebody who is sitting in a cinema watching their own life playing out on screen in front of them. Is it that point that line he makes about it's only when you're kind of like facing death that people actually stop and listen? That he is telling this story from the moment where he's staring death in the face and he's listening back to his own life, and it's almost like that flashback where you play everything out, but there's a sense of detachment and another reality and an inability to blame oneself for one's own actions until the point where he actually accepts, you know what, I am responsible for all this shit and I should probably not do it. But I kind of want it anyway. Let's blow it up. I don't know. There's something there.
Okay.
No.
I'm not 100% convinced, but I'm not convinced.
I'll take that. That's a win for me. With you, that's a win. Look, I mean, I don't want to drag this out because I want this to be quite a fairly kind of basic conversation on Fight Club, because people know this film, and I feel that lots of writing exists out there about it. I think it's probably beloved by film students the world over because it is a meta film. It is a very male film.
It is.
I think that's a disadvantage with it in many respects, and it's quite disappointing watching it back and seeing, for me as a man, it's quite disappointing to watch it back and see just how masculine it is, and how I don't even want to say it's masculine because I don't know if it is masculine, but it's very toxic masculinity that's represented, I think.
Yes, but purposefully. It's addressing a point that remains relevant.
Is it being critical or supportive of it, though?
I think it ultimately critical, because the support system that it envisages, to allow men to connect with this supposedly lost hunter-gatherer impulse and to let them feel connected to and part of. I mean, was it Palahniuk himself said, in talking about the film, society is built now, all's left is for it to run. And that complete disconnect from any kind of useful endeavor. But the mechanism it envisages for connecting back into that, this kind of physical violence to reconnect the hunter-gatherer impulse, very, very quickly devolves into fascism. And so there's no possible way to look at that there's no way to look at that and to walk away with the idea that anyone involved thought ultimately that this was a good thing. Not if you're paying attention. But I think there's enough in there. There's enough critique of society. There's enough questioning. There's enough. I don't agree with the conclusion it draws, but it's not for me because it's not my experience. There's enough in there that says something is badly wrong here. I don't think it has the answers. I think it would like you to think that it has more answers than it does. But ultimately, and this is the thing, 23 years on, this is still relevant. Men's mental health remains in crisis. Late stage capitalism just gets worse. and there is still an absolute dearth of resources for men in crisis, and there's still no really good accepted way for men to say, I'm in crisis. So isn't that depressing, that something that belongs to an era that is in a lot of ways back? I mean, there's dial-up internet in this film, for God's sake. But it's still relevant a generation later.
Sadly, I have to concede that. I completely agree. It's a horrible space. It strikes me that, particularly as we record this during a pandemic, that sense of alienation still exists when you look at what's happened within the United States of the last couple of years in terms of politics. When you look at the protests that have been going on globally over the last little while, it feels that we are still in this space. It feels like it's a very... I mean, that's why I talked to you about this as a modern film, and you're like, it's 23 years old. But it feels like a very modern film. I mean, it feels as pertinent now as it ever did.
Yeah.
Which is, I suppose, in its favour. I mean, it's not every film you can say that about.
Also, Brad Pitt hasn't visibly aged since he was in that film, so there's also that.
To be fair, neither has Helena Bonham Carter or Edward Norton's pretty looking.
A bit more like he's seen a few years, but still, he's still Edward Norton.
I think that probably covers it pretty much for us, unless you've got any last words.
No. We're not supposed to talk about Fight Club, but we just have for an hour.
We did, because I mean, but that of course is the secret to the not talking about Fight Club, is it already presents us with a challenge to authority, that in order for Fight Club to expand and build, you have to confront the authority of what you're being told in Fight Club, and you have to share the words. And I guess that's what we have to do, is we have to keep on talking about stuff in order, and keep on challenging what we've been told in order to kind of progress.
Yes. That's a Rachel, great place to leave it on.
Isn't it? Thanks very much, Rachel. It was good to have you back.
Yeah, it's like old times.
So folks, if you've enjoyed this, or you didn't enjoy it, let us know. Contact us on social media. We're on everything, and find us on our website at www.cinepunked.com. If you like the podcast, do like, subscribe, follow, tell your friends, and we will see you again very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Nothing's real. Everything's far away. Everything's a copy of a copy of a copy.